thank you so much for having me today at your Ensure Justice conference. It was very meaningful to us over at HSI to be able to come and participate in this event and to spread awareness and to offer our support as an agency to all of your communities and organizations that you come from. Just a very brief, basic primer on who we are as HSI. We are Homeland Security Investigations. I'm a special agent with HSI. We're the principal investigative arm for the Department of Homeland Security. We're an agency that was born after the events that took place on 9/11 that was supposed to kind of, as was mentioned, fuse the gaps in intel and knowledge among federal law enforcement. We have over 10,000 special agents charged with investigating and enforcing prosecutions for over 400 federal statute violations, and so it makes our mandate very broad, very vast. It can range from narcotics, money laundering, financial crime, and also, of course, child exploitation statute violations. We are one of the, I think, greatest feathers in our cap is our international footprint. We have offices all throughout the globe, and we partner with our foreign law enforcement counterparts in those countries so that we can execute our mission internationally. That comes into huge play in the child exploitation realm, because we can have victims here in the US and violators abroad, or conversely, we'll have violators here in the US and victims abroad. And we take each one of those investigations just as seriously as if they were happening here domestically on our own soil. So we will, as HSI, we're the only agency that has that international capability to go into another country and get our bad guys, as we call them. Next slide. So you'll see up here, as I mentioned, the different violations that were mandated to investigate. I think if you talk to anybody in my group, we would tell you that one of the things, if not the thing that we do the best in HSI, is our preventing crimes of exploitation. We do child exploitation investigations particularly well, and I think it's in part because of the nature of the violation itself being something that law enforcement across different agencies can come together to address. When you work dope, they call it, like, it's not always the war on drugs, it's the war for drugs. Everyone gets into like a competition over, the great seizure or whatever. But when it comes to crimes against children, it's so rampant, it's so horrible, we tend to all play really nice together. And so when we look at preventing crimes of exploitation, HSI really puts our whole of government approach behind it. And like I said, it's one of the things that we do particularly well as an agency. Next slide. So you've seen these figures earlier today. It's been repeated a bit, but I'll go over the numbers because I think it is just so important to hit on the fact that this is a problem that is only getting bigger and worse. My father is a retired LAPD sex crimes detective. He worked 33 years with LAPD, and he has a story that was very poignant for me when I started doing this work. But back in his day, their crimes against children call would start with like a film developer, calling the police and saying, hey, like, we got a guy that dropped off a roll of film and there's kiddie porn in it, which is what they always used to call it. And so the police would show up, they'd stake out the film lab, and they'd wait for their guy to come in and pick up their film. Got their guy, right? Well, those days are long gone. And he was on the job when he saw the advent of the internet roll out and how it just blew up from there. And the numbers of calls, the way that they had to combat the issue, the whole landscape just changed. And it's only, like I said, gotten worse. So we see the numbers from 2019, I believe, our numbers were around the 7 million mark. And as we move through COVID into today, in 2022, our reports of child sexual abuse material being disseminated online through our cyber tip report system has increased to 32 million. And so what my panel mates were discussing earlier, when they look at those reports that get disseminated through various agencies, this 32 million number is what they're dealing with. And so they are charged with synthesizing the intel from these reports and seeing, what agency has to receive the tip and investigate it. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit more insight into what we're up against as law enforcement, as federal agents, I do a lot of undercover work online. I have face software that makes me look like a little girl. I have an undercover alias, and I go onto all the apps and all the chat rooms, and I present myself in such a way that would be attractive to a pedophile online. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? I mean, I log on and I immediately am just inundated with chat requests and requests to send CSAM material. And again, like my panel mates mentioned earlier, I mean, it gives you that insight into what our children are really up against. So, I mean, it's exhausting. It really is, it's a battle every time they log on to these platforms. But this is a real darknet advertisement for online predators to build a community of pedophiles. So this is real, it's since been taken down, but it's a pedo support community, right? And so you go onto these sites, and they're not even on the darknet exclusively anymore. The darknet for this subject matter is really kind of on its way out because encryption software and capability is so advanced and easily accessible now by users, they don't need the darknet to stay safe and anonymous. They can do it on the open internet with a fair amount of ease. Next slide. So we do, as the government, take a whole of government approach, meaning that every agency works together to make sure that these sites are removed from the internet. But unfortunately, as soon as we take one down, another one does pop right back up. Next slide. So we've talked about this, we've kind of belabored the point, but this is such a prevalent issue and only growing more and more prevalent because of the way that social media platforms and electronic service providers are able to kind of just run rampant in your child's lives. Again, children are just not equipped. I mean, really, when you think about it, a lot of these problems happen to adults, we just don't talk about it. You hear about the horror stories of being catfished when you're dating online. So how do we expect that children are gonna fare any better in this space when they just do not have the capability, faculties, to handle having the whole world on a device just at their fingertips? It's incredibly designed, the system is designed against them, it really is. We've heard from electronic service providers like Meta and TikTok openly admit their algorithms are designed this way. Their algorithms are designed to continue to feed this garbage to your child because it keeps them coming back. This is a whole separate presentation on its own, but data is becoming the single most valuable commodity that can be traded in this country, in this world. And every time your child is accessing the internet, they are giving that data away for free to companies who are mining it, aggregating it, and saving it in perpetuity. Next slide. This is just an image that we use when we go into schools and talk to children about the realities of who is watching you on the internet. This is from Snapchat. Snapchat has this feature called the Snap Map, and if you're not on the Snap Map, you're not cool. You don't know where the gathering is happening, you don't know where the kids are going, and so there's really this social pressure incentive to keep children's media presence as open and not anonymous as possible, which is the exact opposite as law enforcement, as parents, as a community that we want for our children. We want those sites locked down. But these platforms and electronic service providers have made these platforms in a way that it's now embedded with the social pressures in your children's communities to make it much more desirable to have this just open presence on the internet that's not locked down. Next slide. So in my undercover work, you think, well, where do these images really go? Where do these images live? What happens to these images that our kids are being asked to produce and send to complete strangers? Again, they live on the open internet now. You can go on any number of platforms, any number of sites, and see images of CSAM just pretty much out in plain sight. And it presents a problem for law enforcement because while we do have some success working with our ESP partners, our electronic service provider partners, in them accepting our subpoenas and search warrants, it still is the internet. It still is a company. And we do run into a lot of problems with just them being able to comply with legal process, because this account might have been taken down and the data just simply might not be available for us anymore. A lot of platforms that your kids are using now, like Telegram. Who's heard of Telegram by any chance? Okay, if your kid is on Telegram, they shouldn't be on Telegram. There's really nothing good happening on Telegram. It provides, this is a different conversation as well, but for countries that do not have the freedom of speech capabilities like our own, Telegram is a great encrypted site, but for children, there's really not a lot that they need to be on there for. But Telegram is an absolute dark hole for us as law enforcement. It's a non-American entity. It is based in a country that does not recognize our legal process. They will not comply with our legal process. And so when something happens on Telegram, we're just not going to really be able to get to the root of it. So just for that to be aware of. Next slide. We talked about sextortion. We talked about these different types of sextortion. We have kind of your old school classic sextortion, where it's predominantly with our young girls. What we have seen more and more is this financial sextortion rings being run out of Nigeria and the Ivory Coast of Africa. And again, investigatively, these crimes are very difficult for us to investigate because of the significant kind of layers of removal from the crime itself happening here in the US. So we know that they're sharing, they have people in the US working for them. They're the ones kind of facilitating the payments being sent overseas. But it is very difficult for us to ultimately track it all the way back to the Ivory Coast of Africa in a way that is enforceable. Next slide. So when I talk about these topics, I know I throw a lot of information, and this was kind of a down and dirty version of what we see and the different problems that we're up against. But I do always like to really emphasize, and this is kind of the crux of why I believe I'm here, is there is something that we as an agency, as HSI, do try to do about it. We've spent a lot of time and effort developing our iGuardian program. Our iGuardian program sends us as special agents out into our communities, mainly in our schools, and we can perform or provide presentations to parents, to faculty, staff, and students. There are different variations of the same presentation depending on the age of the group. And it's really, I truly believe, the greatest one-stop shop for these different groups on how to safeguard ourselves and our children predominantly on the internet. It will give you so many of the questions you've been asking today about, what are the sites that my kids are on? What are the sites that they shouldn't be on? How do we lock down their devices? How do we make sure that their data is being protected? It really provides the answers to those questions. We really talk about the issues surrounding data permanency, and I would definitely want you to leave today knowing that we as HSI have extended that offer to all of you to come into whatever agencies or organizations that you're coming from. Please allow us to come and support you and to educate your children. And to really just start opening up that dialogue, because we have seen that that is the single most precious preventative capability that we have, is just having that open dialogue with our children and being able to get into that online world that they're on. So please take us up on that offer. Thank you.